No one in the platoon spoke about it in the official report, but we all remember the same instant. The exact moment the jungle stopped being a jungle. There were no shots, no ambush, no screams. We only realized we were inside something wrong when the silence began to feel intentional, as if the forest were breathing, waiting for us. The mission was simple. Find 4 missing civilians, a displaced family fleeing from guerrillas, a man, a woman, and 2 teenagers. It was supposed to be just another rescue protocol in a Colombian hot zone. Lieutenant Julio Herrera led with firmness, a moderate pace, the radio clipped to his shoulder as if it were part of him. Medina stared at the trail with the eyes of someone who had seen too much in the brush, while Rosales, the most superstitious among us, made the sign of the cross whenever the canopy closed over us. After hours of advancing with mud up to our ankles and cold sweat dripping down our collars, we found a clearing where not a single leaf moved, despite the wind we felt on our faces. There they were, the family. Too perfect, too clean, too calm. They didn't tremble, they didn't cry, they didn't run toward us begging for help. They simply looked at us as if they had been expecting our delay. Julio announced the rescue and ordered us to form a perimeter, but no one had the courage to say out loud the sensation that sliced through the group like a thin blade. They looked like people, but they were too much like people. Every gesture precise, every smile lifeless. Later, we would understand that that wasn't the beginning. It was the warning. So, my friend, did you feel that atmosphere? If you enjoy stories that send shivers down your spine, go ahead and support our channel. Click the subscribe button and leave a like so I know you want more stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to hit the notification bell, because here, the darkness never warns you when it's arriving. The operation was officially recorded as Mission Andes Verde, September 14, 1998, dispatched by the Colombian Command following reports of a family lost in the Amazon rainforest while fleeing guerrillas. Lieutenant Julio Herrera, then 34 years old, led the detachment consisting of Sergeant Medina, Corporal Rosales, and 5 other light infantry soldiers, all experienced in tracking and civilian rescue. The region chosen for the search was a dense, stifling sector near the Caquetá River, where the smell of damp earth never vanished and the air felt too thick to be fully breathed. Compasses trembled, radios frequently failed, and the sense of isolation was as physical as it was psychological. The stated objective was simple: locate 4 civilians, father, mother, and 2 teenagers, last seen near an abandoned guerrilla camp. Nothing indicated it would be an extraordinary mission. Just one more rescue, one more tired return, one more bureaucratic report written in haste. However, the local guide warned in a low voice that, in that part of the jungle, sometimes one heard speech without a mouth and footsteps without weight, but no one paid much attention. The climate was humid, the sun aggressive even under the closed canopy, and the ground was covered in treacherous roots that seemed to move when no one was looking. The patrol advanced slowly, mapping clearings, marking trees, recording azimuths, trusting in protocols learned with sweat and gunpowder, unaware that, in that woods, the enemy had no border, no smell, no heat, or shadow. The 3rd day in the woods had already taken the glint out of everyone's eyes, and it wasn't just from physical exhaustion. It was that hunger that never ends, the sour sweat pinning the uniform to the body, skin marked by bites that itched more than they would admit. Medina walked a step behind Herrera, chewing the same piece of gum for hours, saying it was the last taste of civilian life he remembered before the mission, while Rosales kept a newspaper clipping in his pocket with his daughter's face at a school play, folded so many times it looked like a secret about to tear. One of the soldiers, Pineda, carried a cheap medallion on his chest that said, "I'll be back soon," a gift from his wife, and everyone laughed with irony, because there, in the middle of the jungle, soon was a concept that time seemed to swallow. During brief pauses, the men shared damp cigarettes, rotated the canteen with lukewarm water, and made jokes to pretend they were still invincible. But a mere 2 minutes of silence was enough for the truth to emerge. They were far from everything that was safe and familiar, and every tree seemed to hide something that watched without blinking. Herrera tried to maintain the posture of a rigid officer, but he always looked at the old watch inherited from his father, perhaps to remember that a world existed beyond the vegetation, and sometimes he gripped his wrist like someone who fears time will run out before the return. When the radio crackled, even without communication, everyone held their breath by reflex. It wasn't fear yet. It was anticipation, the invisible threshold where the human tries to convince himself he is in control, but has already begun to be observed. The extraction trail seemed simple on the map, but the jungle obeyed no drawing. Every tree was a wall, every meter of terrain pulled at the ankle as if trying to prevent advancement. And yet the silence was what bothered us most. No birds, no insects, not even the usual hiss of the wind in the branches. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come as a shock, but as an absence of noise, an absence of life, an absence of the natural smell of the damp jungle. Rosalie's commented that the air was too clean, and the sentence died without a response because everyone felt the same. That was when Medina, sweating despite the sudden cold, pointed to the clearing ahead. There they were, the family. The man wore clean jeans, without mud, a light-colored shirt open at the chest as if he had just stepped out of the house. The woman held the children's arms with choreographed delicacy, without tremors, even after supposedly days of fleeing guerrillas. The astonishing thing wasn't finding them, it was finding them too calm, standing as if posing for a photograph. Lieutenant Herrera approached, announcing they were safe, but the family didn't run to him, didn't cry, didn't embrace. They only tilted their heads slightly, like someone processing new information with a mechanical mechanism. When they spoke, it was almost simultaneous, the four of them saying variations of the same phrase. They pursued us, we fled, we need to get out of here. But there was no tremor of fear, no accelerated breathing, no memory in their eyes. The soldiers looked at each other, expecting an emotional reaction that never came. Herrera ordered an escort formation, but as we retreated, Rosales discreetly touched the father's arm and felt a dry cold, like metal kept in storage for hours. It was not the temperature of a living body. The family walked with perfect steps, too synchronized, as if they had rehearsed a rhythm, and no one yet wanted to admit the thought that was becoming inevitable. Those people were doing everything too right. In the exact middle of the trail, the sun broke through the canopy and illuminated the group. And for the first time, everyone saw it. Everyone. We had shadows. They did not. From the second kilometer of the return, the behavior of the civilians began to repeat like a poorly programmed loop. Not a human pattern, but a human imitation. The teenager on the right always made the same gesture with his arm when slipping in the mud, but he never actually slipped. He only repeated the movement, as if the idea of the stumble were more important than its actual execution. The woman, with hair too straight for the Amazonian humidity, touched the back of her neck every exactly 23 steps. Medina counted, because he needed to cling to numbers so as not to dive into madness. The adult man just smiled, but the smile was too stable, too frozen, like a painting without varnish. The soldiers tried not to look, but it was impossible to ignore when the entire environment seemed to react to their presence. The sound of insects ceased as we approached. The smell of wet leaves was replaced by a neutral, almost metallic odor, as if the air were being artificially filtered. Upon stopping to refill canteens, we noticed another impossible detail. Raindrops passed through the bodies of the four without leaving a mark on their clothes. The children didn't shiver, didn't rub their arms for warmth, didn't show disorientation. They just followed, always behind the lieutenant, always in silence. We tried to talk. Rosales asked the boys' names, and the two answered at the same time. Same intonation, same rhythm, as if a single throat were dubbing two voices. Sergeant Medina swallowed hard, and for the first time said what no one dared to verbalize. They are learning from us. From then on, walking ceased to be a simple displacement. Every step was vigilance. The forest seemed to listen, the civilians seemed to copy, and we just feigned control. The growing sensation wasn't an immediate threat. It was something worse. They weren't being rescued. We were the ones being studied. It messes with your head to think about it, doesn't it? What would you do in the shoes of these soldiers? Comment below and let me know what you think of this family's behavior. I really want to hear your theory about what is happening in these woods. The moment that broke the team happened without a sound, and perhaps that was precisely what left the deepest mark. The family walked among us without tripping, without fatigue, without missing a step, while the radio crackled with weak static like background breathing. Rosales tried to strike up a conversation, but the responses came with a slight delay, as if each word needed to be processed before existing. The sun broke through the canopy once more and illuminated the entire group. And then we saw the truth with sharp cruelty. 5 soldiers casting shadows on the damp earth. 4 civilians, no shadow. It was impossible to deny. It was too absurd to be ignored. And yet, no one spoke. Not because they didn't want to, but because it seemed the jungle wanted to see for how long we would pretend not to have seen. Medina tested it. Simple, quick, He took a twig and threw it at the feet of the civilians. No sound, no contact with the ground. The twig passed through the floor as if it were an illusion, or as if the floor were an illusion to them. Julio ordered an immediate return, his voice too firm to hide the tremor. Retreating toward the extraction zone, the woman smiled for the first time, a perfect, symmetrical, learned smile, not a felt one. In the final footage, which we would only see hours later, a detail erases any rational doubt. Around us, in the shadows between the trees, there were more of them. 12, perhaps 15. Watching the recordings, we realized the true terror. We were never escorting 4 civilians. We were surrounded. The revelation didn't happen with violence or screams. It happened with silence, a living silence. The kind of sonic absence that doesn't belong in the forests of Colombia, where even the wind seems to have lungs. When the lieutenant ordered a short stop to check coordinates, the 4 civilians stood motionless, aligned as if awaiting a military command, and something in the angle of the man's chin, precise, too mathematical, made Rosales take a step back. The corporal raised his flashlight, and that was when we saw it. The bodies didn't cast shadows, they absorbed light. The beam that should have illuminated them returned weakened, as if drained into that artificially smooth skin, with no visible pores, no natural glow. The woman tilted her head, a slow and mechanical gesture, and for the first time we noticed the motor delay clearly. She turned her face, then her body, with the same order a computer file displays a preview before the full load. The eyes, so black they seemed empty, reflected not the environment ahead, but the soldier watching them. There was no cornea, no internal light. It was as if we were looking into a deep well, and something inside it looked back, copying, interpreting, adjusting. The lieutenant tried to give a voice command. Immediate evacuation, Delta formation. But before any soldier could move, the youngest boy began to speak. Not with a child's voice, with all the voices of the team, mixed, reorganized, modulated like an echo that had learned human timbres. Every phrase seemed taken from private camp conversations, murmurs about longing, fears, lack of ammunition. The boy spoke without blinking, without moving his lips properly, as if he were reproducing internal audio transmitted directly into the air. Right then, we understood. They weren't lost. They were practicing imitation. The soldiers recoiled by reflex, and only when we pointed our weapons did the second visual impact come. The man's skin flickered, like digital fabric trying to render organic texture. For fractions of a second, his form distorted, revealing something skeletal, long, too white, like a bone structure exposed before being covered by the layer of illusion. No one fired, no one breathed. We only knew one truth. That wasn't a family. It was a rehearsal of humanity. Training said to maintain protocol, but the human body doesn't follow manuals when the world stops making sense. The first to break was Rosales. His breathing quickened until it became a choked sob. The weapon trembled so much the barrel clattered against his teeth when he tried to steady his jaw. Meanwhile, Medina tried to rationalize, saying it was some kind of psychological theater, guerrilla warfare with holograms, induced hallucination. But his own voice betrayed him when it failed 3 times in the middle of a sentence, as if his throat refused to lie to his brain. Lieutenant Herrera maintained his posture, at least until he realized his own reaction time was off. He gave orders, and his own voice seemed to reach his ears late, as if the air were denser, more viscous, as if something were trying to reproduce the sounds before they even existed. The team moved into formation with an almost animal effort. Short steps, rigid fingers on the trigger, eyes blinking too fast, trying to confirm reality through microseconds of darkness. One of the soldiers, Reyes, began to mutter a prayer so low it seemed like audible thought. When the boy who wasn't a boy reproduced the prayer simultaneously, with the same intonation, the same error in the word protect, Reyes lost his footing. He vomited into his own vest and fell to his knees, begging for no one to respond, no one to speak, fearing that the creature would learn even more. Herrera evaluated escape routes, but every direction seemed watched, not observed, watched, as if the brush had eyes. The radio hissed with heavy interference, not common static. They were pulsations, like electronic breathing. The sound made the sternum tremble from within, as if each soldier had another heart beating out of rhythm. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for human movement to imitate. Even so, we retreated, slow, organized, lying to our bodies, which wanted to run until they dropped dead. The lieutenant ordered that no one step heavily, no one speak names, no one express too much emotion, as if that could be captured. Fear became an operational rule. When we finally moved a few meters away, the family remained still, but the eyes, the four pairs, followed us in perfect synchronization, like telescopic sensors. And in that silent retreat, we all knew the withdrawal was survival, but also an invitation. They wanted us to return. No one breaks all at once. The mind cracks slowly, like waterlogged wood before it snaps. And that's how it happened. First, the silence stopped being an absence of sound. It became a presence, a weight. The kind of silence that pushes against the eardrum, making the brain ask what is missing. The next step was the emotional echo, thinking of fear and feeling it return amplified, as if the jungle itself were throwing the thought back twofold. Rosales avoided looking at the civilians, but he looked by accident, and whenever he looked away, the thought pulsed. They are behind you, even when they weren't. Lieutenant Herrera had always been a man of steel, but when he heard his own voice whispering too close to the back of his neck, even knowing no one was there, he stalled. His body didn't freeze. His thought did, as if his reasoning had been shut down and restarted. He repeated the same question 3 times without realizing. Retreat or hold position? Retreat or hold position? Retreat or hold position? We heard it. He didn't. Medina, the most skeptical, stared into nothingness with a smile that wasn't his. Tense, small, numb. He tried to write the time of the phenomenon in his notepad, but his hand wrote something else, something that hasn't made sense until now. We have already been rescued. 3 words, handwriting that didn't look like his, strokes too firm for such trembling hands. The radio crackled again, but the interference was speaking our names, in order, from oldest to youngest. And when they called the name of the last soldier, the one who had lost his wife the previous year, he collapsed. He cried loudly, the sound infantilized, like a child lost in a supermarket. No one had the courage to comfort him, for fear of touching him and seeing their hand pass through his body like white dust. The family observed it all, calm, almost curious. They didn't approach. They only imitated breathing, with fractions of a delay, like actors studying humans for a future role. One of the teenagers smiled, but the smile came before the look. Inverted, wrong. The kind of detail that makes the brain splinter. And then the unspoken truth settled in. We weren't rescuing civilians. The emotional rupture would have no weight if there were no matter, something that could be touched, measured, denied. But there was, and that was what destroyed the boundary between belief and fact. When Lieutenant Herrera ordered us to collect evidence, no one wanted to approach the civilians. The fear was physical, intestinal, hot like a fever. But we obeyed. Rosales was the first to move forward. Each step felt like it was inside heavy water, as if the air hardened as he drew near. He extended his hand without touching, merely probing the temperature. The man's body seemed to radiate cold, not like snow or ice, the cold of absence, like something that never had heat inside. The manual thermometer marked impossible numbers, -18 on the surface of human skin. None of us breathed for 3 long seconds. The next proof came without warning. Medina picked up a leaf that had fallen on the ground, a simple test. But when he brought it near the woman, the leaf turned into white powder before touching her. It didn't burn, it didn't fragment, it dissolved like a memory. We recorded everything with a portable camera, red LED blinking, audio registering every ragged breath, and thus we confirmed it wasn't a mass delusion. The recording showed the woman static, shadowless, not flickering with the wind of the forest, but the pixels around her vibrated, as if the file were trying to expel her from the frame. The final proof came when Herrera, in a fit of rational dread, asked one of the teenagers to speak his name out loud. He spoke, but the sound generated no echo in the woods, none, not even the faintest. And the radio simultaneously captured the same name, but with a 1-second delay, like a response from somewhere else. 2 identical voices, 2 different origins. There was no more theory there, only raw data, touched, filmed, confirmed, and yet no one could believe it. We were taken to the base at dawn, our skin still marked by dew, and the smell of the woods impregnated in our vests. But there was no welcome, no rest, only silence, and doors closing behind us with a metallic weight that felt like a sentence. They put us in a narrow room with peeling concrete walls, no windows, just a white bulb hanging by an exposed wire swinging slightly, creating shadows that seemed to breathe as the old fan dragged the air in a slow, cruel rhythm. Lieutenant Herrera was the first to be interrogated. 2 hours of repeated questions. Who were they? Did they touch you? Did you touch them? Was there heat? Was there a smell? As if they were looking for a logical flaw in his memory, as if they wanted to find a detail that would turn the impossible into human error. Medina went in afterward and came out pale, sweating, saying they asked him to repeat the same phrase 17 times, as if testing if his conviction would break under persistence. The most disturbing part, however, was when they brought the footage for review. The screen showed only white blurs where we remembered seeing people, as if the recording had tried to erase it on its own. But when the operator put the video in infrared, 12 figures surrounded the patrol, motionless, watching us from a few meters away, and none of them had been seen that night. It was proof and accusation at the same time. We didn't know if we were rescuers or bait. When we questioned why the video showed distortions, the analyst only replied in a flat voice. Maybe you never found civilians. Maybe it was something else letting itself be found. No one else spoke. No one else breathed normally. From that point on, the investigation wasn't looking for answers. It was looking for control over what would be written in the report, over what should disappear into the archives. The interrogation ended not with clarification, but with substitution of the truth by the official version that was meant to remain. The next morning, 3 green pickup trucks with no identification entered the base. Men in plain uniforms, without flags or ranks, carrying metal briefcases and magnetic erasing devices, walked like they already knew where to go, without asking permission, just crossing corridors with rehearsed haste, as if this operation had happened before. They took the original videos, copied only the stable segments, those where nothing anomalous appears, and ordered them to be attached to the report as intact material. The interviews were transcribed but edited. They cut the parts where we mentioned the shadows that surrounded the unit, removed every reference to the 12 additional figures, and rewrote parts where we described the freezing of the civilians. Lieutenant Herrera was called in private and returned without looking anyone in the eye, holding a sheet we had to sign, declaring it had been a collective perceptual failure, thermal stress, light contamination from the woods, as if 4 people disintegrating before us were an ophthalmological problem. Medina tried to argue, but 2 men surrounded him with just a look. They didn't raise their voice, they didn't raise a weapon, and yet he recoiled as if he had seen death. The final order was clear. You rescued no one. There was no family, only ruins and atmospheric deception. The names of the civilians were removed, but the most terrifying thing was seeing the last stamp on the folder. Classified, Level 5, restricted access to those who do not need to know. From that moment on, we were released, but with the feeling that we remained imprisoned. At night, some tried to sleep. No one succeeded. Not out of fear of what had happened, but because we feared what the government deemed necessary to hide. Today, after all these years, I still wake up with the same sensation, as if someone were standing beside my bed, looking at me with that white silence, that impossible calm we saw in the woods. The cruelest part is that I don't know if it's a memory or a return. Herrera left the army a year later, but never admitted why. He drinks slowly, speaks little, avoids mirrors. He says that sometimes he sees 4 figures behind him, blurred, like black and white TV static. Medina developed nervous bruxism and can't hear military radio without breaking into a cold sweat, because the static reminds him of the exact moment the civilians froze. Rosales disappeared in 2006. His family says he simply got in his car and drove without a recorded destination. Toll cameras show him crossing the border into Ecuador, alone, with the same calm expression the imitators had. No one knows if he fled the trauma or if something was calling him back. I, the narrator of this account, continue to serve. But the jungle nights have a specific type of silence that paralyzes me. I can't turn on flashlights without remembering they had no shadow. Sometimes I see children running in the base courtyard laughing, and for 1 second they don't blink. I've already tried to convince myself it was a mass hallucination, that the white powder was just a chemical reaction, that the distorted file was equipment failure. But when the wind passes through the tents and leaves no shadow behind me, I understand that the only lie recorded in that report was the word deception. Nothing there was a mistake. Everything was a choice of what the world is ready to believe. What we found wasn't a lost family. It was a copy, a draft, a test. And if a prototype fails, it is erased. If 10 fail, the case is archived. If 12 surround a unit without being seen, it means there are more. Nowhere in the document does it say we eliminated the threat, only that it did not persist in the visual field. That means it could still be here. Perhaps that is the true rescue. Perhaps we are now the civilians who don't exist. The story ends here, but the feeling of being watched, that takes a long time to pass. You know, I read absolutely all of your comments, and I love this exchange. Tell me, where are you watching this video from? What is your country, state, and city? I want to know how far our community is reaching. And if you know or have lived through any real horror story, leave your suggestion here in the comments. Who knows, it might become the next video. Don't go just yet. Click on one of the other videos appearing on the screen. Each story here is unique, edited in isolation with all the care for you to dive headfirst into this atmosphere. Thanks for everything, family, and until the next report.